So that happened. Definitely was a chapter. I don't think anyone really expected how visual it would be, because really you could infer that this is happening without actually showing it, but then you get the Evangelion reference and it's like, oh, okay. I think about this chapter, not in a weird way, but just like a really contextually heavy chapter. But there's kind of like a weirdly a lot more to it. And the more I overthink it, the more it sounds delusional, but the more it kind of works. To me, this isn't really surprising. I'm sure for a lot of people though it's going to be, but this is kind of right up Fujimoto's alley. His magazines have never really allowed him to show stuff like this. And to be fair, it's not something he's going to show all too often because it would lose its impact, right? So he's pretty sparing with it, and I would say a lot of this is rooted within Fire Punch and the amount that he's actually shown within there. Now you could run the comparisons, but I don't think this is really surprising. It's kind of to be expected. What we didn't expect was just how visual it would be, because he doesn't hold back. I would say that this chapter is easily one of the more interesting ones as of recently, and there's a lot of different reasonings for this. I will say though, this is why I don't like spoilers, because I can imagine this chapter getting spoiled, because a random leak of a hand with quote-unquote cream on it would go viral 4 days before its release, and the context behind it, you just wouldn't know. That sounds like an entertaining idea, but I like that everyone collectively, the same time, every single week, gets this type of reaction. We're all just here with our hands in our pockets like, did that just happen? Is this real? Am I okay? Is Fujimoto okay? What's going on? I like that. The community bands together, and however you take this chapter is entirely up to you, but I know Ishida of Tokyo Ghoul is somewhere loving this chapter because he got the exact same reaction with his sex scene. I do have something very important for Asa and War at the end of this video, so stick around because the idea has been lingering sneakily in the background for quite some time, and I do think that this chapter confirmed it, or at least hinted to it a lot more. Now for Denji, I feel bad. Asa, I feel bad. This is harassment at its worst. Two people at the same time that don't really have much control over the situation, that's incredibly awkward, that's incredibly complex. One's a boy being very emotionally manipulated and stunted and all over the place, and potentially endlessly year-old devil in the body of a teenage girl that also is kind of emotionally complex, weird, and doesn't have any control of this situation. War is doing this, but it's not in the way that you would think. This is very different for War as well. It starts off aggressive, and yes, I'm gonna sit here and analyze. This isn't anything like War we have seen. She's into this, but Asa sees it potentially a little bit differently, and Denji's out here getting manipulated once again. From Denji's eyes, he's only seeing Asa. To him, this is her, not War. There's no scars, but those scars on her face persist right up to when he finishes, then it jumps back to Asa. Now, of course, she sees this whole situation, she probably feels this whole situation, and I'm curious on what her thought process is. I'm curious on what she thinks, because clearly she's caught up and affected by this as well. The actions of War also inflict onto Asa, but vice versa as well. And this will go into a bigger conversation a little bit later, but I just truly, for a moment, feel really, really bad, because this exploitation of his sexual fantasies and desires has been so long running, so forthcoming and ongoing, and whatever other describing word you want to give it. This quite literally has been here since the beginning of the story, yet it's always been exploited majorly against him, taken away from him, teased, walked around. It's never directly been confronted, at least depending on how he views it emotionally and mentally. You know what I mean? It's heavily manipulated. The two of them, and War included, obviously steering the ship, is definitely pushing something into a completely different realm that we're obviously not used to. I'm very curious to see what Denji feels after this, how he will react, how he will change and evolve, and even his interactions and emotional flexibility towards Asa. Will he view her differently? Will he act differently around her? Will he change certain things up? And it's going to have probably really negative effects. In the same sentence, however, you can say that this is going to create more problems, especially with how War is acting. Originally, it seemed like she was just going to get in there and cut it off, but it evolved. Like I said, it turned into what we actually got, and the final panel is quite literally her hand. I specifically remember people's reactions to Ishida's Tokyo Ghoul sex scene, and it was drastic, overblown. A lot of people liked it, a lot of people hated it, but I think this will have a similar response. Now I want to get into the bread and butter. I think there may be more here. For a long time, I've talked about Asa and War's companionship, how they shift back and forth. And the starting point of this idea actually comes in the form of War right at the beginning of the story when she's talking with Asa. See, when we found out that Yoru was War's name, the idea instantly popped in my head on what her quote-unquote problem would be. All of the horsemen have a counter problem to what they actually represent. Control wanted a loving family unrelated to control. She wanted to love and feel accepted without using her abilities. Pochita, being the scariest individual on this planet that erases people from existence, wanted a long-lasting hug. Fami, being able to starve people and take control of them, has this affliction with constantly eating food. She's a starving girl, and that makes sense. So what would War's be? For a long time, I have questioned this idea, and it's always associated with her name. Yoru, I believe, means night, but it's not the translation of the name itself, it's just the name. Why would a combination of a multitude of different things that make up the embodiment of war have a name? That's what's always confused me. And like, sure, you can make arguments for it, but when you kind of pull it apart, it does and doesn't really make sense to me. Control is a one-to-one thing. Famine is a one-to-one thing. Death is a one-to-one thing. War technically isn't, because there's a lot of things that can to equal war. The idea of war itself, sure, but there's tools, there's things at your disposal, there's half-war efforts, there's war tactics, there's so many different things that come into the idea of being war. So I was like, okay, maybe Yoru is just one of her names, and even the way that she said it, the way that she talked about it, seemed unsure on what to call herself. I was like, maybe she's just trying to remember her name. Maybe she's filtering through some things from the past. Maybe there's a bit of trauma. Now, this led me down the path of her having an identity crisis. That maybe all of the utilage of all of the different components makes her a little bit weird. And maybe that was her quote-unquote problem. That she didn't feel singular. That she didn't feel like the identity because of all of the components. The thing is, I might have found the answer for that. There is a moment within this chapter where the scars on Asa's face disappear. She still has the eyes of war, the horseman's circular eyes, but the scars have vanished. Now you could chalk it up to being a mistake, but the panel is also split perfectly down where her scar crosses her face. And I question that. But what does it mean? I think the identity problem that Yoru, War, might actually have is more so because she becomes one with the people that she absorbs. She uses humans as a host, and she coexists with Asa along this entire story, but over certain periods you notice them changing back and forth in weird ways. Sometimes it's by choice, sometimes it's forcefully. Asa reacts a certain way, or War reacts a certain way that's very heightened and elevated to rip the other personality out the body. So there's two different personalities fighting over the same thing. Now, they do get along, they can change directly and instantly when they're in tandem, but when it's too much, when it's too emotional, too mentally overloading or overwhelming, whoever's copying that takes control. So tell me why War is in control here. Tell me why War is thinking about the kiss. Tell me why War is getting flustered. This is the first that has actually happened. She was so flustered, I originally thought it was Asa. She had all the mannerisms of Asa. She had the flustered nature of Asa. Not once have we seen War like this. Maybe she's just thinking about prior experiences. Maybe this is bringing up good memories for her. Then you get that final panel right at the end. The panel where Asa has no scars, but she still has the eyes of the horseman. So I'm like, wait, are they merging together? Are they becoming so intertwined with each other's anatomy, mental structure, and emotional value that it comes to a point where they cannibalize, and the person that is Asa and the person that is War just become a singular being, a singular entity? When you think about it like that, maybe it makes a lot of sense why Yoru doesn't really have a name or feels weird about having a name to begin with. Why she struggled at the beginning of the story. Because over the endless amount of years that she's probably been doing this, every person that has hosted her, she has eventually absorbed and become one with, and has taken that identity as her own, where she can't actually recognize who she is anymore. Yoru most likely might have been the name of the previous person that hosted her. Put it like this, if War were to die, reset, and get respawned, the name that War would actually give to the next host would probably be Asa. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. That body that she's ever jumped into, she, assimilates with, becomes one with, and you can't pull them apart or tell the difference. All of the memories, emotions, and identifiers of Asa Mitaka become one with war. Similar to what war embodies, a combinational effort of different tools of war. Does that make sense? Going a little bit too overboard? To me, this kind of just works in a really nice way, and a dangerous way at that. I never thought war would act like this. That maybe this is what it takes, something so powerful, something so emotionally vulnerable for both of them in a position as like a traumatizing event to weld them together. This is only an idea, but it has been happening more and more frequently as of late. This chapter kind of just confirms it for me, at least cements the idea more practically. At the end of the day, we kind of already know that if war disappears, ceases to exist, she dies. But what if that's not actually the case? Asa's identity still lives on within war and just becomes that personality. Bit of an interesting idea, bit of food for thought. Don't ask me how I pulled it from this chapter, but there's just weird things within here with how Asa in war is currently acting. Honestly, I applaud Fujimoto. He's committed to it, and honestly, all the more power to him.